And welcome to the June 13th council meeting. We have a moment of personal reflection. Thank you. Next, we'll have the Canadian National Anthem, followed by the Ukrainian National Anthem. Councillor Gardner, please.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
If you struck. Thank you, Councillor Gardner and Madam Clerk. The acting mayor for this month is Councillor Sid Gardner. We acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. Madam Clerk?
I'll take the attendance, Mr. Mayor. Mayor Glenn Grant,
Present.
Councillors Claude McIntosh,
Here.
Dennis Carr, Sid Gardner,
Ici.
Dean Hollingsworth,
Present.
Caroline Nebaert, Elaine McDonald,
Present.
Todd Bennett,
Present.
Justin Towndale,
Present.
Eric Bergeron.
Present.
Councillor Dupel sends his regret, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any additions, deletions, or amendments to Councilor Gardner?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I'd like to move number 5 to communication from consent. And number 5 is the reference to the universal water meters, consulting and project management.
Any others? Councilor McDonald?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move number 1 to communications, please.
Any others? I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Councilor Towndale and Councilor Bennett, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Can we get a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
Councilor Eber, Councilor Hollingsworth? No, we just did that.
Are there any disclosures of interest?
Seeing none?
A motion to go into the committee of the whole?
Councilor Eber, Councilor McDonald, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
And we are looking for a motion to adopt the minutes of May 24th.
Councilor McDonald, Councilor Gardner, all in favor? Carried.
There are no presentations nor delegations this evening, Mr. Mayor. So going into the consent reports, Diversity Cornwall Pride Festival, with the recommendation that Council declare Diversity Cornwall's Pride Festival an event of municipal significance. Authorization to receive a submission of a zoning bylaw amendment application. With the action recommended is that Council receive this report, and B, that Council allow for an application to amend the provisions of the zoning bylaw with respect to 1424 Obank Avenue. Amend lapse date by 6 months to the draft plan conditions. The recommendation is that Council receive this report and that the city shall amend the lapse date for Phase 5 of the Bellwood Ridge Estates subdivision by 6 months from July 29th, 2022 to January 29th. RFP terms of reference for 22P11 laundry services and equipment for housing services, with a recommendation that Council receive this report. Tender 22T16, reconstruction of 5th Street West from Pitt Street to Bedford Street and York Street from 4th Street to 5th Street, with a recommendation that this tender be awarded to Louis W. Bray Construction Limited from VARS, Ontario, at the total bid price of $5,789,692.49. And tender 22T26, reconstruction of Sydney Street from 9th Street to 12th Street. The action recommended is that this tender be awarded to Cornwall Gravel Company Limited from Cornwall at the total bid price of $3,645,024.73.
Motion to approve the consent. Councilor McDonald, Councilor Gardner, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Reports from unfinished business listing. First report is residential rental licensing program, with the recommendation that Council not implement a residential rental licensing registry at this time. Instead, direct administration to use enhanced tools as described in the March 28th, 2022 report.
Moved by Councillor McIntosh, second by Councillor Bergeron. Any discussion? Councillor Ebert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will not support the motion to not proceed with the residential rental licensing program. I understand that administration believes that with relationship building and education and the current programs that they're able to manage the current crisis. However, I believe this requires significant financial support to properly address the emergency. And if not by a licensing program, then where will that financial contribution come from? I believe we should be looking at rental properties as a business. Someone is providing a service or a product for a fee. When a business opens, it is inspected to ensure the health and well-being of its patrons. Restaurants must adhere to a certain standard in order to operate their businesses to ensure that their guests are free of food-related illnesses. That takes place before the restaurant opens, rather than halfway through someone's meal, once it's too late. The same should happen with rental units. I understand that the licensing program may not provide the city with additional powers to enter units. However, because of a potential mandatory inspection when the unit is vacant, we can catch salmonella before someone eats the chicken. Bylaw officers would get eyes on units to spot any issues before they get worse, spotting the first sight of mold rather than having a family live with mold, a family who can't just pick up and leave because of the housing crisis, because they were lucky enough to find a place to live to start with. And the same unit across the street will be at least $500 more a month, which will cut into their grocery budget. Some tenants speak up, however, many are afraid to complain because they consider themselves lucky to even have a roof over their heads, even if that roof is leaking. This would be proactive, which would reduce the amount of property standard complaints, as mentioned by Oshawa. Speaking of Oshawa, they reported that the program did not reduce the amount of housing, which seems to be a concern here. The previous report that was brought to council states that Oshawa has a complement of 25 bylaw officers to ensure that this program runs smoothly. That seems like a lot. That's one officer for every 16,000 residents in Oshawa. We already have more officers per capita, twice as many here actually. Some of the substandard living conditions are impacting the health of our local children. Shouldn't we be concerned about this and take drastic measures to address it? This is adding concerns to our already tapped healthcare system. Now, I know that most landlords in our city are not willing to let families live in these situations. Most care about their tenants. I had the opportunity to attend a landlord association meeting last week with Councillor Claude McIntosh, and I guarantee you that everyone in that room was a great landlord. So I say most landlords, but not all. That's why we should be in these units before vulnerable families move in. Almost done. I want to stress that this program can be a made in Cornwall solution shaped for our own unique needs. And the landlords we spoke to last week at the meeting said that they would be happy to attend a brainstorming session on how we can really make the program work for them, their tenants, and our community as a whole. We don't need to copy-paste what Oshawa or any other community is doing. And we can start with a pilot and build a program that benefits everyone. I urge my colleagues to vote against this recommendation so we can support the most vulnerable people in our city. We're only as strong as our weakest community members. Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm probably going to support the recommendation for a couple of reasons. Just before I kind of speak to it, Mr. Boileau, I don't know if it was in the reports. I know you had a number of them, and I tried to read them as detailed as I could. How much money, if we tried to model one of the other programs, it doesn't matter to me which one, pick, because they're all probably about similar in nature, what kind of money would we be looking at to implement this registry program? Do we have any kind of a number? We said, yeah, we're going to do a registry. Is it going to cost the taxpayers $1 million, $100,000? What kind of number do we have?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think we can confidently say that we believe it would be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay.
We don't think that the program would be well received if it was to try to gather more than, you know, $100 or a couple of $100 per unit, which would be very difficult to recover, and so therefore what ends up happening is it goes on to the general taxpayers.
Okay, thank you. Here's my problem, Your Worship, with the registry, based on what I think I know. First of all, we don't have any more authority. We create this registry, there's no more authority for the municipality to oblige landlords to follow the rules. So it's not like we have any more power or anybody can just kind of arbitrarily do whatever it is they're doing. The other problem I have is that a landlord, I admit there's probably a lot of not very good landlords out there, or not a lot, but some. However, for the landlords that are trying to do their due diligence and be reasonable landlords, we're going to tag a cost on them of $100 or $50 or $200, and the province legislates how much they can charge, raise their rents from one year to the next. There are some people who have been living in apartments for a long time and have not really had significant raises, which means the landlord, if he has a number of older tenants, he's potentially maybe not even breaking even or just barely, because those tenants only have small increases from one year to the next. And we're going to lay on an additional cost, which he can't conceivably parlay back to the tenants, or maybe he can. I don't know all the rules, but we really make it difficult for people to be landlords in a municipality that already has a housing shortage. It seems to be counterproductive to me. While I appreciate the objective to try to protect tenants, and I can appreciate, and I don't have like a nice clean answer here, but the registry doesn't seem to be the one that's going to fix it. The final problem I have with the whole registry thing is if somebody doesn't officially register, we have to kind of wait for an opportunity to try to get them, which means we might only have, Mr. Boileau, did I read it right? In some municipalities, only about 50% compliance. Is that number, that's a number that's in my head. Is that making sense?
I believe that is correct. I think the other problem they're having is really, quite honestly, just keeping up with the files.
So, thank you, Mr. Boileau. So my point is, Your Worship, with 50% compliance, you probably defeat the whole purpose, in that the landlords that are conscientious will register. The ones that are not very good landlords won't register, which means you don't really potentially solve the problem you're trying to fix. So while I appreciate and can acknowledge and agree that there are some tenants in some not very nice places and we should try to help them in some way, I'm not convinced that this registry will get the job done on their behalf, and thus I will vote in favor of the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, Dean touched on a lot of issues that I was going to bring up. The registry is not going to solve all our problems. I would estimate that probably 90 to 95% of landlords are the guys who take care of their buildings. They treat it as an investment. We're asking those 95% to pay to help clean up the act of maybe a 5%. Dean brought up the point, if they don't register, we have to track them down, and that's not an easy thing to do. When we talk about tools in the box, through you, Mr. Mayor, could maybe, Madam CAO, what are we talking about here? I envision that the legal clinic already has a list of people who have complained about their homes. If that was a starting point, say 70, he has a file of 70 people who say they live in substandard homes. If we have access to that list and envision a blitz, including the fire department and the bylaw people working together over a period of months to visit these places, is that feasible?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that that's exactly what we would like to try and do, right? If we can get, if we ever are made known of the properties or the rental properties that seem to have the complaints or to be in that situation, then the city can respond. So I think that we certainly would like to work with the legal clinic, but we'd also like to work with other agencies if they're aware. And we also feel, as a municipality, there are many properties that, so part of bringing fire and bylaw together, we realize, and we haven't done it historically, but when we bring our departments together in a room, properties that are problematic or properties that have had complaints, we end up realizing another department has responded to that property for other reasons as well, right? So I think that part of that portfolio will be known to the municipality. I think we'd like to have a targeted approach initially to see what would work. But I would also like to just refer it over to Chief Weaver, because he might want to add some comments as well from what he's seen.
Chief Weaver.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. And you're correct, Councillor. Certainly as a phased approach in working with our neighborhoods that we see compliance issues already, or that we know that there are compliance issues already. We've already taken one of the steps that's recommended in the March 28th report to establish our Joint Enforcement Task Force. And it has already met a couple of times already and has worked towards managing specific properties and managing specific property owners. The CAO also alluded to other partnerships. We're also getting prepared to establish a partnership with St. Lawrence College in regards to attending their annual or biannual student fairs, where, you know, the most vulnerable folks from a youth perspective, students that are coming to this area and wanting, you know, relatively close housing close to the college, is challenged with some difficult kind of opportunities or lesser opportunities. So we're working to establish and start a partnership with St. Lawrence College to get some better ideas of what we could do to manage some of that population. We've also, the fire department has already started working with City View software, which bylaw already uses. We won't use it for all of our records, but certainly some of the stuff that we work together on, and especially business licensing and things like that, that we can do a better job at tracking files, having an awareness of who is out at those particular properties, as well as having awareness of particular owners of multiple properties that we may be more concerned or have more concern about. We're also, obviously, I alluded the other week to our public outreach from a public education platform from the fire service as well, that we are establishing door-to-door programs, and after the fire program, pre-planned programs, as well as community events in conjunction with human services as well. So we have 2 planned for this year. I'm going to gap on the dates, Melissa, and probably June 28th is one of them, correct? And then we have one in the fall. So watch for the dates for those. Of course, our biggest sprinkler will be there to kind of draw kids and things like that. But certainly, the communities are invited to come see what the city services do, and we get the opportunity to engage the parents, caregivers, and people that are out there renting homes or owning homes that they're renting, to engage them in conversations about what their responsibilities are, as well as what they can expect in their home. So those are some of the programs that we've already established or that are being established, and we look forward to kind of the future to bring kind of some information back about how those programs are working.
One more question to the Madam CEO. With our bylaw department, how many people will we have that could take part in this program?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to redirect that to Mark.
So we currently have 5 full-time staff. We're looking to fill another vacancy, and so there would be 6 in our department, but also, of course, that's accompanied by the efforts of the fire department, who are going out and doing their inspections as well, as the CEO has pointed out, sometimes we're working on the same property to try to advance that property. But so it's the fire department and then the 5 or 6 people who work in bylaw.
Yeah, okay. I just picked up on something that this, Chief, did you say this is one of the few times bylaw and the fire department has worked together?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we've, we're starting to work together a lot better. We've worked at having some meetings together to talk about, first of all, our roles, what our legislation, each legislation allows us to do or does not allow us to do. So we've been working together towards a better enforcement platform.
If one good thing has come out of this, Carolyn, you pursuing this, is that we now are zeroing in on it, and I think without the registration, I think we're making a good approach to this, and I think it'll produce dividends. And I hope that we follow through on that, and I'm sure we will.
Any other questions? Councillor Bennett. Councillor McDonald after.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. One exercise I'm glad we did was invite the Tenant Association and the legal clinic in to speak to us about this a couple weeks back. What it did show to me, though, was that there's a professional group that's lobbying for the landlords, and there's really nobody lobbying for tenants. So the legal clinic is doing some of that, but that's not their only role. They have other things to do. So in the report from administration, I'm feeling okay about the fact that we have recognized the problem and we are trying to come up with some solutions for the problem. So I would be comfortable in supporting the recommendation at this time. But what I would like to know is, would we be able to get an update on how things are going from administration on this particular topic, say in at least a 1-year update? Is that something we can ask for so that we can decide then if we've made a mistake or if what we're doing is actually working?
Madam CEO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have been talking about that as well. So I would expect that we would want to come back to provide updates to council. So I think at a minimum, it would be annually. And if we think that we should provide updates sooner, then we'll do that as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Do we know if anybody's actively trying to get a tenant association going in this city? Is that something we know?
Chief Weber.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. When we were doing a lot of our research, we didn't find that, first of all, there were many tenant associations that were active out there. In fact, when we were looking for some statistics in regards to tenant needs and kind of, what the tenant issues are, we ended up going to the Toronto Association or Tenants Association. That was the closest kind of active one that there is. There is an Ontario Association of Tenants, and they have chapters. It would be something for a group to get started again here in Cornwall, but I don't believe there's anybody actively pursuing that as a tenants association.
Okay, thanks for that information. So also in here is education. So what does that mean exactly? Who are we educating here? Are we educating the tenants that are living in subpar housing, what they can do? Are we going to have a hotline for them to call to get the help they need?
Can anyone answer that question? Chief Weaver.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, yes, in the fire service, public education focuses, and enforcement and inspection, our whole job focuses on reducing fires. And that's kind of our box that we manage. And I've been in this game for 30 years, and our message has not evolved dynamically in 30 years. We're working at changing those messages to focus solely and specifically towards the people that need to hear that message, because there are some neighborhoods that are brand new, and maybe the people just need to know that they have smoke alarms, they have carbon monoxide alarms, and they need to maintain and take care of those. And they work, and those are the types of things. But when it comes to tenant education, we want to ensure that they know that they have rights, but they also have a responsibility. Even though that regardless of the fact that they're renting, they have a responsibility to our act to maintain or to assist in the maintenance of the smoke alarms and to report problems if there are problems to the landlord for repair. They have to have a record of that, so they have to have an email or something that they have reported to the landlord that there's a problem with their devices, their smoke alarms. They can't dismantle one. So even at these events that we're talking about, spreading that information about tenants' responsibility. We've also created the booklet, oh gosh, that's last year, the tenant booklet that has a lot of information for the tenant. And I think we talked about producing a landlord's booklet as well. You know, there's lots of information out there about the Landlord-Tenant Act, but there's not a ton of information out there about the fire, from our perspective, again, the FPPA or the fire code. So we've got that information. We certainly would, we'd relish the opportunity to distribute that to any landlord that would like a copy of it, and to guide landlords in assisting them with establishing their place properly, establishing their rental or checking the rental, inspection. You can make a request for inspection anytime from the fire department. Will come and inspect.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I'm not going to support licensing at this time because I'm confident at this moment that we are on the right track to do something about the problem. And so any tenants that are out there that were looking to us to do something for them, and it may not come in the form of landlord licensing at this time, but we are doing something. And I think that's the message, and encourage them, if they feel like they're falling through the cracks, to contact a counselor, call our housing, call, get the help you need. If it's the legal clinic, just make a call, and then we'll see what we can do for you. So at this time, I'm confident that we're moving in the right direction, and I would really look forward to, if I happen to be around here, a report in 12 months about how this is working. Thank you.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I too support this recommendation. I believe that the program that the city has developed, the programs, are an effective way to address the difficulties that tenants are having, some tenants are having. But I just want to say, before I say why I don't support the registry, I have to commend the United Way and the various agencies that it represented in the letter it sent us, fully supporting us, encouraging us to support tenants' rights. And I want to assure people, I feel that the program that the city has developed and that I hope we'll all support today is a good support for tenants' rights and a much more effective one than the registry would be. My disillusionment with the registry starts with the numbers. According to CMHC, there are 4,000 apartments in the city of Cornwall. Now, the figures that the legal clinic gave us lead us to think that there's something like 7,000 plus, but I believe maybe that includes SD&G. So let's say there's 4,000 in the city of Cornwall. The survey that the legal clinic did discovered possibly 80 people who had had trouble with their landlord. Now, let's say that's conservative, and maybe it's double that, so 160. Round it off to 200. The machinery that we would have to develop to inspect and then to license 4,000 apartments, 3,800 of which are already conforming to the standards that we would expect landlords to conform to in the city of Cornwall. It seems to me it would probably take us at least a year. And I can't imagine the manpower, because let's not forget that there are physical on-site inspections involved in the process to license units. So 1 year minimum, maybe 2. I don't know how much staff. I heard the figure here tonight that Oshawa had 25 people. Well, maybe if we had 25, we'd have to create a whole department, a licensing department. So I think that I don't shy away from it because it's expensive, but I shy away from that because it's inefficient. Because once you have those 4,000 apartments registered, how do you find the bad 200? You drill down and you think maybe you found them, but so what? You still don't, by the registry, have any powers of inspection. You can't get in, unless, of course, the tenant invites you, which the tenant can do today. And I hope, as Councillor Bennett has said, please, if you have trouble, call the city, and I hope people will do that. In fact, I think we could make it really easy. We could say that people would call our communications officer, Francis Racine, if they just sent the message to the city, and he would send it to where it should go. So people can make a phone call tomorrow if they're in a difficult situation, and they can get some redress. The process will be started. And I have some hope after hearing what once again, what Councillor Bennett said about us getting an accounting in a year or so. I hope we establish a report card. I assume we're going to do it. And I hope that the report card will show that with the tools the city is developing, that includes 6 people who are not working in silos anymore. They're trained to work across property standards, bylaws, and building, that these people can do the job that we want them to do. So, and of course, the education piece is extremely important. And I love the fact that I was written up in the report, and I think Chief Weber alluded to it, that there are educationals occurring when people can come forward and see what their rights are, what their responsibilities are, and then speak on a one-to-one basis, you know, with somebody and maybe get some advice. And then advice, of course, will always be start a record, send an email, keep the proof, so that you have a documented history that if you do want to bring a complaint to the city, you've got some proof that, you know, it's not just a bad weekend on somebody's part. There's an underlying problem there. CityView software sounds wonderful. That is another way we're breaking down silos, where we've got 3 departments working together. JET, the Joint Enforcement Task Force, which has already been meeting and which will meet at least quarterly. That's an absolutely wonderful creation on the part of the city. So I certainly support tenants' rights, but I think that if we were to try to win those rights and protect those rights through a registry, we would be wasting time, wasting money, and we would miss the mark. I think that using a registry to correct a situation is kind of like using a sledgehammer to swat a fly. By the time you get the hammer over your head, the fly is long gone, because other communities have had the same problem of compliance. 50% compliance. After all that money that Oshawa has spent and the manpower and the people they've got patting the pavement doing inspections, that's not a model that we should adopt. I think we have the tools, and I fully encourage administration to implement them, to continue to implement them. Now, I did have 2 questions. I wondered what the biggest sprinkler was. I think I know from what Chief Weber said, it's going to be some sort of entertainment for kids at these educationals. And which touch a truck? Something related to?
Chief Weber.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct. That's our aerial ladder. We had it set up in 2019 before COVID happened, down in Lamoureux Park by the museum. It's quite a popular thing on a hot summer day for kids to come and slide through our sprinkler. You know, the biggest lawn sprinkler in town is the catchphrase, but it's more, again, for myself, for our department, it's more about engaging a public, engaging a group. Yes, the kids come and play, but we get the opportunity to give out some pamphlets, give out some, and talk to the crowd about their fire safety in their home. Regardless if they rent, regardless if they own, it doesn't matter. That's what I want, is the opportunity to talk to the community. So that's our biggest sprinkler, but also the Touch a Truck. We did at the end of the season in 2019, early in the fall, where we had a number of city services there. And I'm going to tell you, the fire truck was not the most popular truck to go and touch. It was the Zamboni. You know, we had an opportunity for every city service to have vehicles there. And actually, it was the garbage truck too, because they got to operate the back of the garbage truck. So they get the opportunity to, little kids get the opportunity to come up and actually lay their hands on a truck. But again, it's the engagement of the community, the engagement of parents and caregivers and people that want to talk about whatever they want to talk about. In our case, it's about fire safety.
Yeah, thank you for that exhaustive answer. And I couldn't help but think when you were delivering it of those sessions that we used to do pre-COVID, when I think it was in the context of maybe the downtown DBIA or the Chamber of Commerce would put on the huge displays here in the complex, and there would always be a city corner, and every city department from library to solid waste to fire was represented, and people could ask all the questions that you know, demystify the way the city works and helps people, as the chief says, be engaged. That is such an important thing, and I hope we're going to start that up again. Thank you.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to address some questions to Mr. Waller, who I know is working diligently with the Oblige and Renaissance Association. And the fact that now we have 6 people involved in bylaw enforcement. Start of the year anyway, I think we had 2 people.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it was the way that we had things set up. We only had 2 people who were concentrating on property standards. Now all bylaw officers are concentrating on all bylaws.
And would you say your experience so far is that it's working very well?
I do think that it's the better way to, I think we're going to be able to get to the hotter topics. So, you know, if, you know, we just finished doing an exercise in parking, and perhaps we can take a little bit of the concentration off of parking and put it onto property standards where I think there is greater need. So it gives us that flexibility to deal with the subjects that are more pressing, and I think property standards is that right now.
And I know that people in other labs and the Renaissance people appreciate the fact that you do have only 6 people who are devoted to bylaw enforcement, and they can see the difference already, you know, towards the work even closer to doing it. So that's good that you're doing that. Fire chief.
Your mic, please.
How are you doing? Fire chief is well known in the Levelage, not because of fires, but because he meets with the people there, and I know particularly Dr. DeBook is a big fan of yours and appreciates the work you're doing in the cooperation, and I think that's something that hasn't happened in the past, so I think you should be congratulated on that. The systems we have in place work if they're used correctly, and I think, Mark, you've done a good job with like I say, the hiring of the 6 people in bylaw enforcement, and already there's a difference being made, and you're another person that is well thought of in Levelage and by the Renaissance people because of the work you're doing. You can see a difference already. It's not a huge difference, but there's been some improvement in the cleanliness and people picking up garbage and looking after. It's the people who live there who are going to make the biggest difference, and they are joining in and helping out. So I think there's only good things going to happen in that part of the city, and I think what they're looking for from council and from administration, and they're getting it, is assistance and appreciation. And I think yourself and people like the fire chief are approachable and doing what's been needed for quite some time. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Gardner, sorry.
I'll be brief. I heard all that was said, and I'm not going to repeat that. But because you have 6 bylaw officers now, hopefully that's enough, because I've been asking you for 8 years now to hire what you need to do the job properly. But the question I have is, will the bylaw officers now with property standards will be proactive or reactive and complaint-driven? Like, I have to explain, sorry about that. I was down there not too long ago, and there was a fence that was busted up, and it was not an unsafe thing. I had to go down and see that. So is our bylaw officers going to be reactive to what they see, or are they complaint-driven?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We do, of course, react to complaints, and we try to do the best we can with those. But I think there are 6 sets of eyes that are out there now, and of course, if they're going to a property at, X, Y, Z, certainly they're keeping their eyes out open, as are the fire department. And I should also mention that the Municipal Works Department is also to be commended for a lot of issues that are not just on private property, they're left on the right-of-way. So it's that department as well that's very helpful when it comes to cleanliness. But to answer your question, it's both. We are, of course, reacting to complaints, but also when we see something that is unsightly or unsafe, we're dealing with it to the best of our abilities.
Based on what was said and based on the answer, I think we're looking at the registry, and I will vote in favor of what was recommended by administration. And thank you for the report.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'll support the recommendation based on the many, many reasons that were alluded to. And I think we've got a good action plan in place right now, administration does, along with the chief and his department. And so I think we're going to be working in that way. And if anybody, this is the tenant's rights and responsibilities booklet. If they want any, they can go to City Hall, and we have them available there. All in favor of the motion? Against? Carried. Thank you.
We are now looking for a motion to receive the unfinished business listing for June 13th.
Motion? Councillor McIntosh, second by Councillor Bennett. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Communication items. The first one is 2021 fourth quarter financial overview, preliminary report, with a recommendation that council provide direction to administration regarding contributions to reserve for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2021.
Need direction. On page 110, there is the recommendation from our previous meeting. Go ahead, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Before I make a motion, can I ask a quick question, Your Worship, with regards to this? Because there is
Always
no, I know there's no motion on the floor, but to you, Madam CEO, page 106 for us doing the paper version. Paragraph, second paragraph, right just below the tab, background discussion, quote, city policy follows the Municipal Act requiring a surplus or deficit be contributed or funded through reserves as proposed in this report. Now, if I read that correctly, and I know we've had a bit of discussion along the way, does the Municipal Act oblige us to put any surplus money into reserves? Municipal Act says we have to do that. Am I reading that correctly?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the Municipal Act requires you to contribute the surplus to reserves. If you have a deficit, you have to fund that from reserves. If you don't have money within your reserves, then you'd have to plan to budget for that in the following year. I think the Municipal Act would, like at the end of the year, I think based on the conversation that we had, the question is that cash that is, or the surplus at the end of the year, council needs to make a decision with it. So the appropriation of those amounts to reserves, what we've done is we've followed what is consistent with our reserve policy that we have with council and recommendations that we're making with respect to how, you know, the business units that generated those surpluses, what they can be redirected towards through reserves. But the Municipal Act requires you at the end of the year to deal with your surplus or your deficit primarily through contributions to and from reserves.
Well, that being said, Your Worship, to me, it's relatively cut and dried then that we support the motion to support the recommendations as listed in the report, that this money is allocated to reserves. I would suggest that if council or councilors want to do something with it after it's in a reserve, you can make a motion later to sort of do something with it. I was looking for some options, quite frankly, but if the Municipal Act says this is how it works, then to me it seems fairly cut and dried. So I'll make a motion to support that the money be allocated to reserves. If I can get a seconder, as per the report, recommendations in the report, and then pending later on, maybe make subsequent motions. If I can get a seconder for that.
Second by Councillor Bennett. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Canada Day celebration with a recommendation that council approve the funding request for $12,000 from the Canada Day Committee to pay for the fireworks.
Councillor Bennett. Seconder, Councillor Towndale. Discussion. Councillor McDonald.
Well, I support this motion wholeheartedly, and since we've just finished discussing reserves, I note that the money will come from reserves. So I hope all my colleagues, of course, will follow suit.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
RFP Terms of Reference for 22P12, Universal Water Metering, AMI Consulting and Project Management, with a recommendation that council receive this report.
Moved by Councillor Gardner, second by Councillor Towndale. Discussion. Councillor Gardner. Yeah, Mike, please.
I'm not recommending, I just want to speak on the subject first. I'm totally opposed to it, so
Okay,
whoever,
motion, Councillor Bennett. And Councillor Towndale still second it? Councillor Gardner.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to vote against the recommendation to receive this report based on the following reasons. I've not spoken to one single resident who is in favor of water meters. I have received a multitude of phone calls, emails, and have gone directly to homes and was told in no uncertain terms that residents do not want water meters. I have not had a single favorable comment. At a public meeting, two former mayors, Mayor Brian Lynch and Dick Oblige, both spoke against installing water meters. We have some of the best quality water in Cornwall, in all of Ontario, at a very reasonable cost. Which brings me to the cost. The estimated cost to install water meters is between $17 million to $20 million. If I add up what our debt is now, we're looking at $52 million, $7 million for the Art Center, or $6 million, $8 million overrun in public works, $20 million, 17 to $20 million to add to that, which would bring us to about $84 million in debt. I don't think it's the time now for this to happen. Adding to our already high debt, which will be borne by the Cornwall taxpayers, will be about $84 million. In the last budget, part of the tax increase was to service our existing debt. And that had to do with insurance also, but it's the debt. Add to the debt that overrun in Public Works. The debt keeps growing. Remember, after selling Cornwall Electric, we were debt-free 25 years ago. Now we're in around $80 million. Let's not add to our residents' costs by spending another $17 million to their debt load. As both former mayor said, we don't need water meters. I would like to have the original movers of the motion to install water meters bring a motion to the table to reconsider, and I ask tonight that we defer this. Thank you.
Is there a seconder for deferral? Councillor Carr. All in favor of the deferral? I'd like to speak on the motion. Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to vote against the deferral. Look, in '91, we had this discussion, some 30-odd years ago, about water meters. And at the time, well, we don't have enough money. And it's come back a number of times. The truth of the matter is this, Your Worship. This isn't necessarily, first of all, water meters are a far more equitable system to determine cost of service. That is simply a fact. It is a better system. Second of all, in case anybody hasn't noticed, where it is, the environment's going down the tubes. And water meters will encourage people to use less water, which quite frankly is good for the environment. I don't know how you put a price tag on that, Your Worship, and I suppose for us, maybe right now it's not a big deal, but my children and possibly my grandchildren may regret the fact that I didn't support the water meter concept today. So I am not, and I'll tell you right here, Your Worship, you defer this, it's gone. I'll be
Just-
my
could I-
father's age before we get back to this.
Just for clarification, the deferral is on receiving this report.
Yeah,
We've
well,
already passed the
Point
motion.
is, I realize that, Your Worship, but why are we deferring then? I guess that's the question you
That's
usually ask in meetings. What's the point of deferral?
The point of
Let's go with
deferral is,
that.
this is just not to receive this report. It's just for information.
Okay, but let me ask you from a point, and I don't know who wants to tackle this. If we defer, what does that mean? Are we going ahead with tender? Like, what exactly is the deferral accomplishing? Is the question I'm asking.
You'll have to ask the mover.
Sure. Like, we're deferring for what purpose? To not receive, so does that mean we're not going to put in water meters? We're not going to go to tender? Like, what exactly does that mean? I'd love to find out.
You're asking me my opinion, I'll give
Oh,
you.
you, through the chair, Councillor Gardner.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor. You're asking me my opinion for deferral? I'm totally against water meters, and so are the residents of this city that I have spoken to and heard from. So, yeah, the deferral is to kill the water meters if I
Yeah.
can.
That's
Thank you.
contrary to what a deferral is supposed to do, so I'm not going to support it.
Councillor McIntosh.
If this, how was this contract linked to the decision to put meters in every house in Cornwall? If we turn this down, is that the death knell for water meters, or is just we don't have a consultant?
An MCAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so I think we outlined previously a fairly long approach, so it is part of the process that we want to follow. We do want to properly proceed down the path through this process, like through this. So I think if council didn't want to approve proceeding with this, then I think we need direction from council. What would you like to do with water meters? Because this is the approach that we are recommending to council that we need to take. If we have some technical questions, we do have some admin resources here this evening that can answer some of those questions.
So we'd go back and it would take 2/3 to overturn that previous decision. So have we hired anybody yet to deal with this?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we have. We've hired a resource internally, which we should introduce. I think I'll ask Mr. DeWitt to introduce our new recruit.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we have hired an individual to lead the water meter program. Her name is Natasha Poziga, and I'll ask her to stand up, please. And Natasha has put together the terms of reference to hire this consultant that you're being asked to approve. That is the terms of reference. And so, in short, the answer is yes, we do have a resource.
So with the ball is now rolling. It seems strange we're debating somebody's job here because that's what we're doing. We've hired somebody and now we're suggesting maybe that person may not have a job. I'm going back to what Dean said, and I voted against meters. I'm strongly opposed to meters. But to what Dean said earlier was that where are we going with this? We defer it and we come back and debate it again. So we don't have a consultant. We have somebody in place to run the program. But we still have a legitimate vote to install meters. I'm confused.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sitting next to my illustrious colleague, Councillor Gardner, I think the main focus of his motion is not to spend the money because we can't afford it. And this council, since I've come back to replace someone who left for greater things, what we do is spend money. And as my colleague said, 25 years ago, we used the funding from the sale of Cornwall Electric to clear the city's debt, and we had no debt. Now we're deeply in debt, and all we seem to do is take on big projects that we have to question. Is there another way of doing it? Do we have to do it the way it's been presented to us? I will support the motion to defer to give us another chance. And like my colleague, Councillor, I thought you were crying about the motion. As Councillor McIntosh says, he is not going to support spending the money. Whether we have water meters or not, I feel the same way. I think at this point in time, we cannot afford to spend the money that's been allocated for water meters. And this is not my first time voting against it. I voted against it the very first time it came up.
Okay, motion, who in favor of the deferral? Opposed? Deferral is defeated. Okay, now we need a motion to receive this report.
Mr. Mayor, can I wrap up this?
Now that vote's done, sorry.
At the end of the day, it's the money. It's the $84 million that's costing the residents money.
Councillor Gardner, the debate's over.
I'm sorry, but I can't wrap this up, and I don't like that idea. Thank you.
Councillor McDonald,
I'd like to move we receive the report.
second by? Is there a motion? I apologize. All in favor of the motion? Against? Carried. Thank you.
Craft Shack 2022 Summer Socials, with a recommendation that council declare the Craft Shack Summer Socials events of municipal significance.
Moved by Councillor Bennett, second by Councillor Bergeron. Discussion. Councillor
If I
McDonald.
may. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have had a couple of questions. The address, 1 Water Street, I think that's the address of this building, isn't it? Is it across the street?
Yes.
Seems to me, so I was confused about the exact locale we're talking about. I think we're probably talking about the southwest corner of the Cornwall Square building.
It's the old
Right.
active green.
Right, okay. So 1 Water Street, I thought was this side of Water Street. Not? Okay. So now, is this going to be indoors or is it going to be outdoors? Do we know?
Mr. Boileau?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Our communication through the Chief Building Official's office is that this activity would be held outside in the parking lot.
Thank you. So I note that June 24th is also the night of the first art walk. So I presume that probably both parties have spoken, that space isn't already allocated to your Arts Council, who might have, you know, that they're allocating spaces all the way down Pitt Street to people. Like, I don't think that's incompatible with an art walk. I think, in fact, it's probably very compatible with it, but I just hope that the space hasn't been allocated twice, for example. Every now and then, things go on in the city, and we wonder if people are aware of what everybody else is doing. This might be one of those cases. So you'll probably find
Mr.
out.
Boileau?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not familiar with there being a conflict. I'm not, but I would agree with you that I would think that those two things are fairly compatible, just more activity.
Okay.
Madam Clerk has some input.
The Art Walk's road closure goes to 58 Pitt Street, so just in front of Mexicali Rosas. The rest of the street is open to traffic, so I doubt very much that they would have thought of taking that parking lot. It's not part of the street closure.
Right, okay. Thank you for that.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
We have 2 new business motions, Mr. Mayor. The first one, Emergency Management and Advisory Committee. Now therefore be it resolved that administration present council with an update on the response preparedness derived from this program to ensure the protection and security of the residents of Cornwall, is proposed by Councillor Sid Gardner and seconded by Councillor Claude McIntosh.
Discussion. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to hear from the chief of the fire department or the emergency management people as to what their plans are, what they're doing, and how they're going to start to have meetings on a consistent basis. If I may, I'd like to turn that over to Fire Chief.
Chief?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, we would be more than willing to bring a presentation or report to council at an appropriate time, as according to the request from the new business motion. In regards to some of the efforts that we've taken since the emergency management wing or division has been moved over to the fire department roughly a year ago. So I will, obviously you've already met my colleague Leighton Woods, who has been working diligently within the portfolio to ensure, one, in 2021, that we had achieved compliance. Because again, emergency management is regulated by the province to ensure that we have an annual compliance level. So we did achieve a compliance last year. And Leighton has been working diligently to move the portfolio forward. As an additional update for now, we do have a meeting set up, sorry, Leighton, date? June 27th for our Emergency Planning Committee, which you are a member of, as well as at that meeting we'll be bringing forward a consultant report with 35 recommendations for improvements to our emergency plan. as well as the other documents that are attached to that plan, which are form the annexes to that to the plan. So there are a number of recommendations that we're going to bring forward to the Emergency Planning Committee that will have impacts throughout our portfolio of emergency management. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to that report. I need to say that this motion for new business came as a result of the storm they had around Ottawa that caused so much damage. And because we hadn't had meetings for quite a long time, I thought it was time that we revisit this and make sure that the residents are assured that emergency management planning is here. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the report.
Any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Our second new business motion, Kingsley Crescent curb replacement, proposed by Councillor Justin Towndale and seconded by Councillor Eric Bergeron. Now therefore be it resolved that administration prepare a report on the feasibility of replacing the curb on Kingsley Crescent.
Discussion. Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. So I was contacted by a resident of Kingsley Crescent who had raised the issue that currently we are resurfacing the asphalt on that street, but the curb and the curbing on that street is not part of the project. The resident was concerned as the curbing has sustained quite a bit of damage over the years because it's quite old at this point. There's a few photos attached to the report which reflect some of the condition, but is not inclusive of the entire condition of the curbing on that street. My understanding is that the curbing is planned for future repair. However, the residents of Kingsley have signed a petition. They've gathered 65 signatures. Considering the size of the street, I'm almost sure that's everybody. So I'm asking for a report from administration on the feasibility of adding curbing to the project or adding it as a future project sooner rather than later. And at that time, should that pass, I'd discuss further once we have a report in front of us with numbers and whatnot. Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
I'm going to support the motion, Your Worship, and just as a kind of an aside, in light of the fact that we just approved some money going to reserves, this might be an excellent opportunity to utilize the policy to the advantage of the locals in terms of the vis-a-vis any potential report. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what administration has in mind. Thank you.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just ask why we aren't doing the curbs while we're doing the resurfacing? Because it seems to me we usually do them both at the same time. So I'm just curious why the decision was made not to do that.
Mr. Fawther.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So we evaluated the curb when we scoped the work for the project. The asphalt condition is at the time or is due for resurfacing. We did an inspection of the concrete curb at the time. It was about to go out for tender. We determined that the concrete curb had another asphalt life cycle to go through. So basically, it could last a little bit longer. We could maximize our resources with our asphalt resurfacing and potentially do a few more road resurfacings and a few more streets. So it was our view that the curb could last another cycle and could remain for another 15 years by the time we resurfaced Kingsley again. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just looking at some of the pictures that accompanied this report, and these show some damage, but it doesn't show the curbing everywhere. So would we, like, I'm looking at some that are broken down, would we replace a section, or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. So we are replacing some sections of curb while we're resurfacing. So we're replacing curb in areas where there's drainage problems. So a few sections where there's ponding along the curb, and a few sections where there is damage on the curb as well. But we're not replacing the entire street.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Is this, just for my, Mr. Fawther, is this normal practice for any streets that you do you normally replace all the curbings, or
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So normally there's a few asphalt resurfacing cycles, like asphalt resurfacing occurs a few times before we replace the concrete curb. The concrete has a longer lifespan than asphalt does. So we're able to, or we do resurface the road a few more times before we actually get to concrete curb replacement. So basically, asphalt in this setting would last 15 to 20 years between resurfacings, while concrete may last 60 to 70 years.
Thank you. Just a procedure perspective through you to the clerk. What's a more normal process when you receive petitions?
We did get a new petition policy approved, and that is to have the petition submitted to the clerk's office, and we included on the agenda as a consent item, sending it to administration for a report.
Okay, so just for future references, any petitions go to the clerk rather than coming to a new business motion. Councillor Gardner.
I just have a comment. A number of years ago, when we talked about resurfacing with pavement, and we had cutters, which is what I call them, that were in bad shape, water seems to get under the pavement because of the cutters being in bad shape. And so is this going to happen here, where we're going to put pavement down and then not put cutters and have water freezing and water that will destroy the pavement? Because that's been the case in the past on sidewalks. So will that happen on the road too? My question to Mr. Fothrow.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, it won't. So we're replacing any areas where there is ponding along the curb lines, which would cause the issue you're describing, but we're addressing that before we resurface as part of this project.
Councillor McIntosh.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Michael, what would be the cost of doing the whole job?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we did a preliminary estimate, and it would be approximately $150,000 to $200,000 to replace all the concrete curb on Kingsley Crescent with barrier curb and gutter.
And we're doing replacements. What would that cost?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it's in the order of $30,000.
Okay. And where would the extra money come from if we decided to change and go to complete replacement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's unbudgeted at this time.
Okay.
Okay, the motion is basically to prepare a report on the feasibility of replacing the curbing. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Bylaws 2022-070 to 074, inclusive, listed on the agenda, are being presented to council for adoption.
Motion, Councillor Carr, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
We are now at the reports from standing, advisory, special, and ad hoc committees of council.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and this is a happy occasion tomorrow for me. We'll be welcoming all the health units from across Ontario to an Alpha conference. We in Eastern Ontario will be the hosts, and I'm happy to welcome everyone from across Ontario to our Eastern Ontario region. The host will be Dr. Paul, but I've been asked to welcome everyone from across Ontario, which I have done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you. I'd like a report or to ask for an update from the Portlands Committee. Does that require a motion? Is that a report that has to be asked for?
Good question. I'm an MCAO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that we can bring forward a report as an update. I mean, there's 4 members of council that sit on that, on the co-owners, so if council would like an update, I think we can work with the elected members and bring forward a report.
That's fair, thank you.
Councilor Burr, is there anything particular you want in the report? Just because we can give general information, and maybe you know have any specifics.
I'm curious what's going on with the Portlands, and we have not received a report as a council, so would like to know where that stands.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if council would like, we could provide, I think, between Mr. Boileau and I, we could probably, and Mr. Fother, we could provide a brief update if you'd like to. So council's aware that the warehouse building that was on site has been removed and demolished. That was done in the late summer, early fall last year. The area has been certainly seeded and grassed since then, and there's been rocks that have been put in. So there's quite a significant open space in that area currently. ACC Futures is looking at opportunities to try and have some type of opportunity for gatherings in that area. I think they're trying to maybe plan 1 or 2 types of events that could be, you know, potentially advertised and promoted to go down and partake in that site. We are currently also going through work on the remediation side to continue monitoring and updating our environmental site reports. So that is still going to take a little while. Following that, I'm going to just hand it over to Mr. Boileau because he might have a couple of items he wants to add as well.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would only add, and I believe council would be aware that as a co-ownership, we are discussing with the federal government a piece of property that would be added to the Harbor Lands area. And so it is deemed surplus by the federal government. And so the co-ownership have put an official request in for consideration for that property to be included together with the Harbor Lands. So the Harbor Lands would have a direct link to Point Maling from the harbor.
Thank you. I believe as well it'd be good for us to bring a report of any significant changes. Like there's, and that periodically, and soon as there are significant changes, bring that report to council. So it's a good idea.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, if council would like us to arrange a bit of a tour of the site to kind of see that section of property that Mr. Boileau indicated, or also there's some old fencing that needs to be taken out and fixed up, and there's work that's been done to clean part of the brush area along the bike path. So if council would like, we could also easily arrange a date to meet down there and do a site and a walk around on the lands to understand what has been going on and where the site is that we're looking at with Transport Canada. So we can coordinate that.
Good. Councilor McIntosh.
Yeah, I don't know who to address this to, but several years ago, the federal government announced they were divesting themselves of what we call the canal lands, I think St. Lawrence Seaway property, and a couple other agencies involved. Have we made any progress in this? I know COVID kind of put the brakes on everything, but we in discussions, or where do we stand right now with that? I guess, Mark?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have advanced. In fact, we had a meeting with not only Transport Canada, but also with Canada Lands. You'll recall that Transport Canada's method to divest of their property is through Canada Lands. And so we had an on-site meeting with them for the entire length of the waterfront. And so we had conversations about all of the parts that are being discussed and are deemed surplus already, that goes all the way from Point Maling to the dam. So pieces along there and corridors. Of course, there's even a strip along Lamoureux Park that is in that category. And so we're advancing on that. COVID certainly did create a bit of a delay in that process, but we're working with Transport Canada and with Canada Lands to advance that. One of the more recent pieces of information is that they have indicated to us they have some engineering and environmental studies for the canal lands, and we've reached out to them through Katie to get that information in our hands so that we have a better understanding of the structural integrity of the canal walls, any environmental concerns that there may be.
Has a potential price ever come up in those discussions? Any idea what they would want for the lands that we want?
I think they would, Canada Lands would probably tell you that they're looking for fair market value. But I think certainly we are going to make arguments that there are certain lands that are landlocked that have no other options. Some are not serviced. So for example, the lands to the south of the canal are not serviced. There isn't really it's also zoned open space. So there are a lot of limitations that go with some of these lands. Lands to the north of the canal, for example, have development capabilities, and I think you could certainly make an argument that there's a market value for those lands. You know, the strip along Lamoureux Park, I think we would all agree that it probably is best to be joined with Lamoureux Park. Point Maling, the part that I've just described that gets from Point Maling to the harbor, these are all lands that we think should probably be either with that co-ownership or in municipal hands, or in the case of that northern section of the canal lands, possibly privately developed.
Just former Minister of the Crown who negotiated for Lamoureux Park for $1 suggested to me that maybe we should pay $1 for the lands we want. You ever brought that up?
I know Mr. Mayor has given his opinion of what we should be paying for certain lands, and I'll let the mayor speak to
No, the discussions with Transport Canada have been very, very positive, and the amount of dollars that they were looking at are not zero, but it's not far from it. So, I think, as I said, I think we've got a very good positive relationships in our discussion, and that they should, Katie Wells is doing a wonderful job keeping Transport Canada aware that we have to get meetings. So she's very, very aggressive in that with the federal government. So anyway, any information we get will be coming right back to council as soon as we have any news at all. Madam Clerk.
We are now looking for a motion to adopt the confirming bylaw, Mr. Mayor.
Motion, Councillor Bennett, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Motion to adjourn. I won't forget tonight. Councillor Bergeron, Councillor Bennett, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Good meeting.